Hello, welcome to this video. I'm going to go through a practice test of the ACT, and I'm going to cover the odds on one of these tests. So ACT is 60 questions, so I'm going to do 1 to 59 and all the odds then. And I'm going to get rolling into it. So basically what I'll do is kind of just give a little bit of a brief explanation, some of the work that would go through these in each of these problems, and then show you the correct solution. So in this first one, just some basic computation, knowing what absolute value is. So do the operations inside each of these. So I'm going to end up with 7 minus 3 is 4 in the first, and then minus 3 minus 7, which is negative 4. Taking the absolute value of 4 is 4, and the absolute value of negative 4 is also 4. And then when you subtract these at the very end, you'll get 0, and that is letter D. Alright, vehicle A averages 14 miles per gallon of gasoline. Vehicle B is 36 miles per gallon. At the rates, how many more gallons does vehicle A need than B? So what we're going to really do is just look at these different rates. So we're looking at a 1,008 mile trip. So if I take 1,008 miles divided by the 14 miles per gallon, that means that I'm going to end up at 72 gallons for that one vehicle. And that's vehicle A. And then vehicle B, I'm going to end up with 1,008 over, and that rate was 36 miles per gallon. And if I divide these out, that one's going to come out to 28 gallons. So vehicle A needs 72, vehicle B needs 28. Subtract the two, vehicle A needs 44 more gallons. The figure below is composed of a square, BCDE, and it's an equilateral triangle on top. So we're going to find the perimeter of ABCDE, which is basically this giant house looking thing. So since this is a square, all of my sides are 6, and that brings those to all be 6 basically, and I have the equilateral triangle on top, which means that those are also 6. So what you really have here is just 5 of these 6's, so basically 6 times 5, and that's 30. It's a really fast perimeter problem. Basically just knowing what a square and what an equilateral triangle is allows you to make the assumption that every one of those sides is 6. Alright, if 40% of a given number is 8, then what is 15% of that given number? So let's first figure out what that number is. I know that 40% of that number, which is x, is 8. So just a little algebra here. X is the number. It's going to come out to 20. So 20 is the number, and what we now want to do is figure out what 15% of that number is. So I'm going to take 20 times 0.15, and that means that it is 3. So we are at C. Keep cruising along here in the standard coordinate plane. M is a point of AB. It is the midpoint of AB, and B has coordinates 7, 3. So if I were to make just like a little diagram of this, we're going to have our A here, and we're going to have B here, and M is in the middle. So we know the midpoint of this, and the midpoint formula basically says whatever my x and y coordinates are of these points, all that I'm going to do is average them. So average your x's means add them together, divide by 2. Average the y's, add them together, divide by 2. Except we're given the midpoint. So I'm going to basically know that if I take 7 plus one of those endpoints divided by 2, I get the x coordinate of the midpoint. And then I can do the same thing on the y side of things, which is take 3 plus whatever the other y coordinate is. Again, we're averaging y coordinates divided by 2, and that would equal where the 4 was, again, from the midpoint. So just a little bit of algebra on both of these. I'm going to end up with 10 equals 7 plus x, so x is going to come out to 3 here. And then the y coordinate, I'm going to multiply my 2 to the other side and get 8, and that is equal to 3 plus y, so y is 5. So I'm looking at 3, 5, and that answer is D. Alright, so this one deals with matrices. So what we're looking at are two separate sets of matrices, and we're given basically just a t-shirt inventory. So it's a lot of words in this one. If you want to take a sec, you can pause it and read through the problem. But what we want to know is the total of inventory for these two stores. So what I'm going to do first is sum this first matrix, and that's going to give me a total of 220. My second column is 250, and the third column comes out to 250 just by adding these values. And what we're looking at is the cost in each of these. So it's giving me that my 220, which was the sum of the first column, I'm going to multiply by that 5 because that was the cost here. And to that, I'm going to add my 250 from my second column and multiply that by the $10, and then add to that the 250 of the third column and multiply that by 15. So what I'm going to end up with is 1100 plus 2500 plus 3750, and I get a grand total inventory of $7,350. Alright, so the next two questions are going to focus on this one table of values, which is talking about a poll of 200 voters. So they indicated there's 4 different candidates here that they voted for. What percent of voters voted for Whitney, which is this bottom one, and that is 30 of the voters of the total of 200. So 2 ways you can either get that 200. You could either sum all of the voters, or just if you read the directions, 200 people were registered to vote and voted, and that comes out to 15%. So that one's A. That's a little bit easier. The next one says if this were to be converted into a pie chart, so a circle graph, what would the central angle be? So this one we're just going to make a small proportion and look at Gomez, which is 40 of the 200. So I'm going to take my 40 of 200 and set this equal to some angle measure over how many degrees are in a full circle, which is 360. So cross multiply, I'm going to end up with 200x equals 360 times 40, and x ends up being 72 degrees. Alright, so that one was more of a proportion to go through. 17. So with this, which is the following the slope of a line parallel to this in a standard plane. So in the equation y equals mx plus b, m is your slope. So in this case, slope of this line is 2/3, and parallel lines have the same slope. So we're just looking for e here. If it asks for perpendicular, you would take the opposite reciprocal of this. What that means is you would flip the fraction and then change it. If it were positive, the perpendicular slope would become negative. But parallel lines have the same slope. All right, what is the smallest integer? So it's basically saying a nice number, so a whole number that is greater than 58. So what I'm going to do is find a couple of perfect squares that are around 58, and that would be 49, and that would be less than the square root of 58. And the next nice perfect square after that would be 64. So the square root of 49 is 7, and the square root of 64 is 8. Alright, so what it's saying in the directions then is what is the smallest integer that is greater than this, and that's going to end up being the 8. Alright, what values of x are solutions for this? So this is a quadratic. It's going to be solvable by factoring. So what I'm going to do is subtract 8 from both sides. So I can set this equation equal to 0. And I'm going to look for the 2 factors of -8 that add up to 2. And those 2 factors are going to be positive 4 and -2. So 4 times -2 is -8. The 4 plus 2 would give, the 4 plus -2 would give me this 2. So what I'm going to do is set each one of these values equal to 0, and then you solve. So x is equal to 2, and x is equal to -4, and that answer is A. Alright, if m has a non-zero x-coordinate and a non-zero y-coordinate, and the coordinates must have opposite signs, then it must be located in which of the quadrants. So what I would do is just wants to know where your signs are, basically. So in quadrant 2 you have a negative x and a positive y. Quadrant 3, both of your x and y are negative. And in quadrant 4 you have a positive x and a negative y. And it wants to know where we have opposite signs. So again, as long as you know your signs for these quadrants, your answer would be for quadrants 2 and 4. And then that is answer E. Alright, in the figure below, so now we're talking about 2 triangles that are similar, so that's what this little dash here means, or that little, it should be like kind of more of a squiggly tilde, and their lengths are given in centimeters, and we want to know the perimeter of triangle ABC. So we know that it means that the 2 triangles are similar down here. perimeters are proportional just as the sides are. So what I'm going to do is set up a proportion that says side AC corresponds to KM, so 3 over 7.5. And I'm going to set up a proportion that I don't know the perimeter of the whole triangle on the left, so I'm going to call that X. And what I'm going to do is look at the triangle that's on the right, and if I were to take the perimeter of this, which means add up these three sides, the perimeter of that triangle, LKM, is 35. And again, this is just a little cross multiplying. So 7.5x is equal to 105, and then x ends up coming out to 14. So answer is B. Alright, a hot air balloon 70 meters above the ground is falling at a constant rate of 6 meters per second. There's another balloon that is rising at 10 meters per second. 10 meters above the ground, rising at 15 meters per second. And we want to know when they're going to be at the same height. So you got one going down, one going up. I want to know when they're going to be equal. So these are going to be two linear equations that I'm going to write in slope-intercept form. So the first one, I'm going to say y equals negative 6x plus 70, because that one is dropping at 6 meters per second, but it's starting 70 meters up. The other one is rising 15 meters per second and starting 10 meters above the ground. And we want to know when they're going to be equal. So what I'm going to do is just substitute this value in for y, since it is what y is equal to. So what I'm essentially going to end up doing is setting the equations equal, and then you're going to solve. So bring x over by adding, I get 21x. I'm going to bring my 10 to the other side by subtracting, and I'm going to end up with x equals 2.9, and that is going to be after, because it wants to know when, so the nearest tenth of a second, so when would be 2.9 seconds. If it wanted to know what that height was, I could take that 2.9 and substitute it back in for x, and that would give me my corresponding y value. So just be careful that it asks for when they were going to be equal, and not necessarily the height that they would be equal at. Next one is talking about two different cubes. We have cube A and we have cube B. So cube A, it says, has an edge length of 2 inches. Cube B has an edge length that is double what cube A is, so the length of the edge is 4. And what is the volume of cube B? So if it's a cube, all of your sides are equal. To get volume, you just take 4 to the third power. 4 times 4 times 4 being 64. So that would be 64 cubic inches. Alright, past the halfway point. With this one, you're given a formula, and we're talking about a right circular cylinder. And it wants to know the surface area of this, and it's going to be expressed in pi. So they're giving you the formula. So surface area is equal to 2 pi r squared plus 2 pi rh. And you're just going to substitute some values in here. So in for r, I'm going to substitute my 10, which is my radius. That is half of 20. So they're giving me diameter. So I need my radius here. And then on for this other side, you're going to take 2 times pi times my radius times the height. And basically just simplify the expressions. This first expression comes out to 200 pi. And then this expression is going to come out to This expression is going to come out to 400 pi. And then you can add these two things together and treat your pi's as though they're like x's or something. We have 600 pi. And it's just looking for that simplest form. So something that you're not going to go to the calculator for and actually give me a decimal on this. You're just going to express your answer in terms of pi. The next one, so the number of goals over 43 soccer matches is shown. So here's my number of goals, and here's the number of matches with that. So there were no matches, there were 4 matches where no goals were scored. There were 10 matches where there was 1 goal scored, and so on. So what I'm going to do is make basically a large equation for this. So I'm going to write out, because it wants to know our average number of goals scored per match to the nearest tenth. What I'm going to do is kind of compile this information by saying that there were 4 games where there were 0 goals, and there were 10 games where there was 1 goal, 5 games where there were 2 goals. So what I'm doing is figuring out the total number of goals that were scored, and then I'll divide it by the number of games, because that's what an average is. So it's going to be 9 times 3, 7 times 4, 5 times 5, 1 times 6, and then my 2 times 7. all of that, that's my giant numerator right there, all over the fact that there were 43 games. So by taking all these sums, I'm going to end up with the fact that there were 120 goals scored over 43 games, and that comes out to 2.8 goals per game. So B. This one, just knowing powers and properties of exponents. So 3x to the third raised to the third is the same thing as saying 3 to the third times x to the 3 times 3, which is 9th. And 3 to the third power is 27. So 27x to the 9th. So that one is E. Question 37. So we have a point that is, we have our center, we have a point that's on a circle. So they're giving me the radius here, and we want to know the coordinates of this point P after it's rotated 90 degrees clockwise. So I went about this by basically looking at slope between the center and this edge, and by rotating 90 degrees clockwise, it's really just going to tell me where that perpendicular point would be then. So what I ended up doing is looking at the slope between those points, so between the center and the edge of the circle, which is 4/3. And again, I mentioned before that a perpendicular would be an opposite reciprocal of this. So from looking at the point 2, 3, rotating that means what I would really be doing is adding 3 to my x coordinate and subtracting 4 from the y coordinate. And if I do that, I would end up with 5, -1, and that's where that point would become then on that circle. So 5, -1, and that is the answer C. So again, I looked at this more or less because it says rotate 90 degrees counterclockwise, that I could just drag my point down here. You could also just look at the radius is 5, and then since it is all part of a circle, this would also be 5, and again, it's basically all I'm doing by adding 3 to my x coordinate and subtracting 4 from my y. It took me down to where that other point would be. In the next one, it's talking about an angle being bisected here by a line. And we want to know the measure of angle DBE, which is this angle right here. So what I'm going to do is split this into 3 equal parts and figure out that, hey, if I have 3 of those x's, since they're all part of a line, that means they're supplementary, and that's going to be equal to 180 degrees. So x is going to come out to 60, and that's really all we're solving for then, is the measure of angle DBE, which is 60 degrees, so that is answer B. In the next one, this one looks just tricky right off the bat just because of the diagram, but again, they're going to give you a formula in this. This is the law of cosines formula. So you can read through the problem. It's talking about 2 ships and how many miles apart they are, and their locations. So which of the following is an expression for the straight line distance between these 2 ships? So what I'm going to do, and this is a law of cosines problem, they're giving you the law of cosines here. So you want to know this distance, and how that's going to work then is you take this opposite side squared, and that's what C is. So I'm going to call this C, and then across from that would be capital C. So that's really where these formulas differ, are the angles, if you look at all the different answers. So what you're really solving for in this problem, because this diagram itself looks really confusing with all these numbers on here, you're really trying to find what this angle is, where my green is. Okay, so this angle here, so they're giving you the 170 degrees here, they're giving you the 300 degrees here, and what you're really going to do is just try to find the angle that's between those two. So I'm going to take 300 minus 170, and I'm going to get 130 degrees. So that's what this angle is that's right here, which again, that's the only difference between every one of the answers in this setup. So B is your answer then. Once you figure out again what that angle is, that's the only part of that formula that you really need to find. In this one, we're given a trapezoid, an isosceles trapezoid, which is huge because that means that these 2 sides are congruent. And we're given AB is parallel to DC, so I got my top and my bottom. Given a couple angle measurements here. And basically I'm going to use a lot of logic with this being an isosceles triangle then. An isosceles trapezoid. That means that this triangle on the inside is also isosceles. So if I have 25 degrees here, I also have 25 degrees here, and that means I have 130 degrees here. And from there, you're just figuring out a bunch of angles. If I know that this is 130 degrees, it would be a linear pair with this, which means it's 50. And then I could figure out what this angle is in the corner. I'm going to call it x. And then what I'm really going to do is just focus on this triangle. And I know that I can use my triangle sum theorem and say 50 plus 35 plus x is going to equal 180 degrees. So x is going to come out to 180 minus this 85 right here. So that is 95 degrees. So B. Which of the following is a rational number? So this is just testing your knowledge of a rational number, which is really any number that can be expressed as a over b. So the square root of 2 is a really ugly number. If you throw that in your calculator, you're going to get 1.41 something. So a really ugly number that can't be simplified. So that's not it. Pi itself is irrational, so the square root of pi is also going to be irrational. Square root of 7 is just the same argument as the square root of 2. It's an irrational number. And now we look at these next two, which are written under square roots. So this first expression I could simplify as 1 over 5. The square root of 1 is 1, but radical 5 can't be reduced. So that's not going to simplify. This last expression I could rewrite as radical 64 over radical 49, and these are both perfect squares, and that would come out as 8 over 7, so that is a rational number, so E would be your answer. Alright, Tom has taken 5 of 8 equally weighted tests in his U.S. history class, so they're giving me his average, which is exactly, it's 78%, so how many points or percent does he need to earn on the 6th test to bring his average to 80? So what you're going to look at right now is the fact that he has taken 5 of these tests and his average came out to 78. So I want to know how many total points that was as far as a sum. So that's the number of tests that he took divided by the 5 tests that he's taken, and that average came out to 78. So solving for x indicates that he's had 390 points total between all those tests. So what I want to know is to what would I have to add to that and divide by 6 to know that he's going to come out with an 80. Okay, so on the 6th test, what would he need to get in order to end up with an 80? Again, a little bit more algebra here. Multiply the 6 to the other side, and I would end up with 390 plus y, and that's going to equal 480, and then just subtract 390 on both sides, and y comes out to 90. Alright, question 49. This one you have two exponential expressions. You can either solve this with logs, or I'm going to use something that's kind of a change of base formula that says if I have, for example here, and instead of using numbers, I'll just use letters. If I have a to the x equals a to the y, okay, because my base number is the same in both of these cases, x would equal y. And that's just one of these exponential properties that we can apply. So I'm going to do that same thing here. What I'm going to do is rewrite the number 8 as 2 to the 3rd power. Okay, so 8 can be expressed as 2 to the 3rd, and I know that 4 can be expressed as 2 to the 2nd. So what I'm going to do is rewrite this left-hand expression as 2 to the 3rd times what is already written up there, which is 2x plus 1. And I'm going to set that equal to this right-hand side, which is 2 to the 2nd. And again, I'm going to bring this 1 minus x in parentheses. So this is the way that I'm choosing to do this problem to avoid logs. And since my bases are the same, I can take these two expressions and just set them equal to each other. So it becomes an equation that you can solve for x. This is going to give me 6x plus 3 equals 2 minus 2x. I'm going to add my 2x to both sides and get 8x plus 3 equals 2. Subtract 3 on both sides, and then divide. So x is going to come out to negative 1 over 8, and that is C. Alright, so the last few here. So an integer from 100 to 999 is to be chosen at random. What is the probability that the number will have 0 as at least one digit? So you're going to look at basically that we're talking about 3-digit numbers here. So what I'm going to do is just say, okay, we have 100, 101 has a 0, and 110 have zeros. And I'm going to follow this pattern because we're going all the way up to 199. So I'm going to keep a row going down here that would include 200, 300, 400, blah, 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 all the way up to 900 and something. And then with this, so that's 9 values here. If I were to keep this going where my 0 is, my next value would be 102 and 103 and blah, 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 blah. And that would be a total of 81 values, okay, that are going to have that 0 in the middle. Okay, and the reason I'm getting that is because there are, again, we're going from 1 to 900, and there are 9 different values, okay, that could occur at. And then same logic for this last column. There are going to be, again, we can keep this going all day where I have 120, 130, 140, blah, 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 blah. And same thing, this could be 210, 220, 230, 240. So I have 9 times my 9, which again, that's another 81 values. So that's a total of 171 values are going to have 0 in them at some point, and there are 900 total values, so 171 over 900 is the probability. So it's got some pretty confusing logic in terms of where those zeros are. So you just have to analyze the different ways that you could express these values with having 0 in them. So this is a little trig on this next one. We're given a right triangle. One of the angle measures in the triangle says if I take the inverse tangent of A over B, I'll get that angle. So we're going to be taking that ratio and then applying it to figure out a cosine ratio. So we want to know which ratio would even solve, which ratio we would use tangent for in order to find that. So that would be this angle right here. I'm going to call this capital A. And if I wanted to know the measure of angle A, I could take the tangent ratio. So tan A equals A over B. So that means A is equal to tan inverse of A over B. So that's where this is coming from. So if I just look at the fact that they are referring to angle A as my angle in this problem, I want to know the cosine of A. That's what it's basically saying. So cosine being adjacent over hypotenuse. So that's going to be taking B over that hypotenuse, which is A squared plus B squared. And then that is option D. Alright, which of the following is the equation of a circle that's on this map? And it looks like it is centered at the origin. So any circle that is centered at the origin can be written as x squared plus y squared equals r squared. That's the easiest formula, considering it's centered at the origin. If this were not centered at the origin, this part of the equation changes a little bit. However, in our case, this is a little bit easier then. So from the center to my edge is 52. So x squared plus y squared would equal 52 squared. And that would just basically be the equation of the circle. So you want to know which one of these options that is then from here. And that is option E. Alright. We have 2 equations shown on this graph here. What are the real values of x that would satisfy this inequality where it's saying where would this top function give me a value that would be less than the bottom function? So that's basically looking at the gap between these 2 functions. Okay, we want to know where the parabola looking function, and that's the one with the x to the 4th, we want to know where that looks like it's going to be less than my line. So I'm shading this area, and it's talking about x values. So which x values does this occur between? And that is between the x values of 1 and 2, where the blue area occurs then. And that is option E, which says that x can be between 1 and 2, then your y values for the for the line would be greater than the y values for the parabolic looking function. And then lastly, we're given vertices of a triangle. So here's my 3 coordinates. We want to know the area of the triangle. So I'm going to use the formula for a triangle for area, that A equals 1/2 of your base times your height. So my base extends from point B to point C, and that would be from 1 to 5. So that is 4 as far as the distance goes. And then my perpendicular height would basically be from this bottom line to here, and that is going from 3 to 5, so that height is 2. So I can just substitute those values in, 1/2 of 4 times 2, and that's going to give me 4, so that answer is A. So it's a lot of information to take in at one time. I know I went really fast through some of these explanations, and this ACT covers a big variety of material. So a lot of stuff we really covered throughout this entire video. Hope this helps answer some questions.